Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are taking a look at Herbert Hoover in the context of the Great Depression. I think there are a lot of people, there's a big misconception out there that Herbert Hoover caused the Depression. We're going to find out that that's not really true, but he still gets a lot of the blame for it. As I've said over and over in here, perception trumps reality. And the people of the time really perceived him as maybe not even the cause, but certainly maybe contributing to it. So what we're going to see is that when the Great Depression begins, nobody really knows how long it's going to last. Nobody knows how deep it's going to be. Nobody knows how bad it's going to get. And Herbert Hoover was no different. Even as the president of the United States, you can't tell how long these things are going to last. And a lot of people, including Hoover, really thought that this was kind of a natural phenomenon, that it was part of the business cycle. You're going to have up cycles, you're going to have down cycles. And he really considered this, or thought it would be, a relatively short-term downturn in the business cycle. Although it was really a very severe one, he thought it was probably short-lived and that the markets would come back and consumer confidence would return, and that in the end it would be a blip on the radar. Well, this is no blip, it's here to stay. And so as people began to call for more and more action and wonder what to do and how they're going to survive this, Hoover really believes that there's not a whole lot for the government to do. It's not their place. In fact, acting in terms of raising taxes to provide relief and creating new programs, that an overactive government might do more harm than good, and that raising taxes in the midst of a depression would only further to cause more harm. Now, he really is opposed to what we consider direct federal aid. He did not want federal money going to individuals, going to people, and really there's no precedent for that. The American government never had done anything of that sort before. In fact, when it had attempted to, it had been really strongly criticized. Those things had always been defeated. And so while today we look at government a little bit different, back then he was working on 157 years of precedent, that the government was not supposed to interfere in people's personal economic matters, right? That was kind of a big no-no. So he takes a very laissez-faire or kind of hands-off approach to the Great Depression. Now, he really feels that a government spending spree would potentially deepen the Depression, or at the very best, that it would simply be temporary relief, that once the government spending stopped, the depths of the Depression would return. And so he was concerned that whatever government did, it could make things worse. Now, that's an okay approach to take if you believe that it's going to be a short-term matter. Again, they had no way of knowing how long it was going to last. Now, that's not to say that he didn't do anything, right? He does what he believes it's within the government's power to do. He is going to attempt to really strengthen banks, strengthen railroad companies, and look at ways to aid other big industries. Now, today you might look at that and go, well, it's the government helping big business, of course. Well, at the time, they were looking at the fact that big business was necessary. Railroads and transportation and these big companies, the banking industry, are vital to our economy. And not only are they vital to our economy, they employ tens of thousands of people within various industries. And so the idea was that if we continue to strengthen them, they'll continue to employ people. And when the economy bounces back, the banks will be there to kind of help bring it back. The railroad companies will be there to support industry and business so that things can return to something a little closer to normal. Now, a lot of people didn't really like that because they were hurting. They were desperate. And they saw him helping big companies, but being unwilling to help individual people, being willing to help the little guy, the small businesses, or the individual families. That's probably an unfair criticism of Hoover, but it's one that persists still. Now, he does, again, he's not just sitting idly by. He pushes very hard for what's called volunteerism. He approached the business community and he really pushed them to keep employment, to keep wages, to keep prices at current level. He didn't want to see the prices rise and then production fall. He didn't want to see wages cut. He didn't want to see people unemployed. So he's really approaching the business community going, listen, this is your time to really show your patriotism. This is your time to show that you are for the American people. As government, he believed that he had no authority, no governmental power, and that he was really confined by the Constitution. But that didn't mean that he couldn't approach them in the best interest of the country. And so that's what he does. Ultimately, this doesn't work very well because it's volunteerism. It's completely dependent upon businesses' willingness to help out. And many businesses did attempt to do this. However, when people aren't buying your products, you can't just continue to employ huge factories worth of people that are producing something nobody wants or nobody can afford. And so, while many businesses really attempted to follow this idea of volunteerism, in the end, they have to do what's in the best interest of the company in order to survive. Uh, they're trying desperately not to go under. So the volunteerism doesn't work. Well, then he pivots to what we call localism. And he says that it's local business or local governments, state governments that are really in the best position to understand their state's economy, to understand where people are hurting the most, and be able to meet the local needs. And so he begins to push this idea that it's not the federal government's responsibility, but local governments are more well suited to that. The local government, though, response is we don't have enough to meet the depth of need. And that's true, right? They didn't have enough. He's going to really encourage Americans to kind of tighten their belt and ride the depression out, that this too shall pass, right? The problem is he's saying, go to your local churches, go to your local charities, seek help in the local communities. Well, that's a really good idea, and Americans have always been very charitable. The problem is when there is an economic downturn, one of the very first things that people do is they stop giving to charity, at least in large part. If you have to make decisions about keeping the lights on and buying food and paying the mortgage, the last thing that you're really going to give money to is charities, right? As much as we love that, my wife worked in charity for almost 2 decades. And as somebody who tried to raise money for these charities, they always saw a bit of a downturn whenever economic times got hard. That's the first thing that people cut out of their budgets is giving. So these charities are being asked to provide more and do it with less. That's not really a combination that works. And so volunteerism didn't work. Localism didn't work. Local charities did not work. This thing is proving to be far more desperate, far more deep than anybody could have imagined. So desperate American people really begin to look at Hoover and label him as a do-nothing president. There we see a really good sign there, right? In Hoover we trusted, now we're busted. The people began to see him as a do-nothing president. I'm going to argue that he wasn't a do-nothing president. He was working within the confines of every other presidency that had preceded him. The idea of precedent, right? He was working within the confines of government regulations and rules. He was working within the role that government had always had. But people saw him helping big industries, doing things to strengthen business, and felt like he was ignoring their needs. So he really gets a lot of blame for this. Again, he did not cause any of it. But I think their big problem with him is that he could have done more or should have done more. And his defense was, how could I? The Constitution doesn't allow for it. 157 years of government precedent does not allow for it. There's nothing in our experience that would allow me to deal with something like this. We may just have to write it out. So Hoover's America really is one that is very desperate. We see incomes begin to fall dramatically. Unemployment begins to rise dramatically. It hits over 25%. Homelessness soars. Banks and businesses are going to fail. It is an incredibly desperate situation. For more on the Great Depression, for more on kind of the conditions of America, there's a whole separate video that deals with kind of this, the Depression from a very high view, right? But for now, we're just dealing with kind of Hoover and his view of America. Now, he is going to run for re-election, but after years of depression, it's not going to be hard to defeat him. The view of him as a do-nothing president is solidified, and he gets defeated very, very easily by Franklin D. Roosevelt. We'll come to know him as FDR. So there is another video on FDR's response and the New Deal. to the Great Depression. So make sure that you watch that one as well. For now, though, guys, we are done. I appreciate you watching. Make sure that you're liking the video, that you're subscribing if you haven't already, and leave me any comments. These topics are way too big for me to cover everything. So if you have questions, I try to get back to everybody. Thanks for watching, guys.